Oh, Engels, you didn't know what anarchism was. During the last final years of both Marx and Engels' life, even though Marx had become more anarcho-syndicalist, at least accidentally if you read his work The Civil War in France and his analysis of capitalist blue home but with hierarchy in it, and Engels' conclusion where he said socialism utopia scientific, where he said the state ownership of the means of production is not the solution. So even though they have some anarchist conclusion, they still have a bias to hierarchy. And one of the best examples is their last critique of anarchism. Technically, there were other you know their analysis what happened to the anarchist revolution in Spain, 1873, which was just talky shit, and Marx notes on Bakunin's status and anarchy, which is just 1.5 page long, and it's just doesn't contribute literally to anything. It's just there, just a bonus point. This is the last time on Authority by Friedrich Engels. So it makes a big critique of it, but it makes a huge misunderstanding of what anarchism is. Based on the massive book Anarchist FAQ, didn't Engels refute anarchism on Authority? No, far from it. Engels' infamous essay on authority is often pointed by Marxists of various schools as refuting anarchism. It is often associated the essential Marxist work for often short out, pun intended, when anarchist influence is on the rise. However, this is not the case. In fact, his essay is both politically flawed and misrepresented. As such, anarchists did not think that Engels refuted anarchism in his essay, but rather just showed his ignorance of the ideas he was critiquing. The ignorance essentially rests on the fact that the whole concept of authority was defined and misunderstood differently by Bakunin and Engels, meaning that the later critiques was flawed. While Engels may have thought that they were both speaking on the same thing, in fact they were not. For Engels, all formal group activity mean to subject the individual make it up, you know, they make it up. If the Given that Engels considered the idea of Bakunin to fly in the face of common sense and to show that he, Bakunin, did not know what he was talking about. However, in reality, it was Engels who did this. The first fallacy in Engels' account is that anarchists, as we indicate, we talk about anarcho community, but in this case, it's talking to Bakunin, so it's anarcho collectivist, so this is different. But do not oppose all forms of authority. Bakunin was extremely clear on this issue, a difference between types of authority, of which he opposed only certain kinds. For example, he asked the question, does it allow that if I reject all authority? And answered quite clearly, no, for be the front to entertain such a thought, he acknowledged the difference between an authority and expert being in authority. This meant that if bow before the authority of the specialist and declare myself ready to follow to a certain extent, so long as may seem to be necessary, their general indication, even their directions. It is because their authority is imposed upon me by no one. I bow before the authority of specialist because it was imposed upon me by my own reason. Similarly, he argued that the anarchists recognize all natural authority and all influence of fact upon us, but not of right. For all authority and all the influence of right was sufficiently imposed upon us immediately because of falsehoods and oppression. He stressed that the only granted omnipotent authority and one natural and rational, the only one we respect, will be that of the collective public spirit of society, founded on equality and solidarity and the mutual respect of all members. But Kuhn contrasted this position with the Marxist one, where he argued we're champion of the social order built for the top down, always in the name of universal suffrage and the sovereignty of the masses upon where they bestow honor obeying their leaders, their elected masters, in other words, a system based on delegate power and so hierarchical authority. This includes the masses from governing themselves as in the state, and this in turn means domination, and any domination presupposes the subjugation of the masses, and consequently their exploitation with the benefit of some ruling minority. So while Bakunin and other anarchists on occasion did argue that anarchists rejected all authority, they say Carlo Bedman correctly notes tend to treat authority as a synonym for authoritarian, so had identified authority with hierarchical power structures, especially those of the state. Nevertheless, their practical proposal and some of their theoretical discussion present a different picture. This can be seen when Bakunin noted the principle of authority was the immediate theological, metaphysical, and theological idea that the mass, always incapable of governing themselves, must submit at all times to the benevolent yoke of the wisdom and justice which in one way or another is imposed from above. Clearly, by the term principle of authority, Bakunin mean hierarchy rather than organization and need to make agreement what is now called self-management. Bakunin clearly did not oppose all authority, but rather a special kind of authority, merely hierarchical authority. This kind of authority places power into the hands of a few. For example, when labor produced this kind of authority, with a meeting between master and slave, the worker sells his person and his liberty for a given time. The state is also based hierarchical authority, with those who govern, i.e., those who frame the laws of the country, as well as those who exercise the executive power, being in an exceptional positional diametrical opposed to popular aspiration towards liberty. They aim at viewing society from a high position in which they find themselves, and so whoever says political power says domination over a more or less considerable section of the population. Thus, hierarchical authority is top-down, centralized, and imposed. It is this kind of authority Bakunin had in mind when he argued that anarchists are in fact enemies of all authority, and it will corrupt those who exercise it as much as those who are compelled to submit it. In other words, authority was a shorthand for hierarchy or hierarchical authority, the imposition of decision rather the agreement to abide by the collective decision you make with others when you freely associate with them. In place of this kind of authority, Bakunin proposed a natural authority based on the masses governing themselves. He did not object to the need of individual association themselves into groups and manage their own affairs, rather opposed to the idea of the cooperation necessary hierarchy. This kind of free association would be expression of liberty rather than as a hierarchical structure. It's denial. Anarchists reject the idea of giving a minority, a government, the power to make our decisions for us. Rather, power should have rested in the hands of all, not concentrated in the hands of a few. We are well aware that the need to organize together and therefore need to stick by decision reached. The importance of solidarity in anarchist theory is the expression of this awareness. However, there are different kinds of organization. There can be no denying that in the capitalist workplace or army there is organization and discipline, yet few. If any sane person will argue that this distinctly top-down hierarchical form of working together is something to aspire to, particularly if you seek a free society, they cannot be compared to making a distinctly by a collective decision reached by the free discussion and debate within the self-governing association. Clearly, Engels misunderstood the anarchist conception of liberty. Rather than see it as essentially negative, anarchists argue that liberty is the expression in two different but integrated ways. First, there is rebellion, the expression of autonomy in the face of authority. This is the negative aspect of it. Secondly, there is the association, the expression of autonomy working with your equals. This is the positive aspect of it. As such, Engels concentrates on the negative aspect of anarchist idea, ignoring the positive, and so paints a false picture of anarchism. Freedom, as Bakunin argued, is a product of a connection, not of isolation. How a group organizes itself determines whether it is authoritarian or libertarian. If the individual had to take in a group, manage the affairs of the group, including the kind of a decision can be delegated, that group is based on liberty. If the power is left to a few individuals, whether elected or not, then the group is structured in an authoritarian manner. This can be seen from Bakunin's argument that power must be diffused into the collective in an anarchist society. Clearly, anarchists do not reject the need of organization for the need to make and abide by collective decisions. Rather, the question is how the decisions are to be made. Are they to be made from below, by those affected by them, or from above, imposed by a few people in authority? Only a sophist will confuse hierarchical power with the power of people managing their own affairs. It's improper to use the word to denote equally as authority. Choose such opposing concepts as individual, subject to the autocratic power of the boss, and voluntary cooperating of the conscious individual working together as equals. The lifestyle between the governing mass of conscious individuals can speak together as equals, and cannot be compared to the organized, cooperative, free individual, yet this is what Engels did. The former is marked by hierarchical power, turning to the subject into automation, performing the mechanical movement without will and thought. The latter is marked by participation, discussion, and agreement. Both are, of course, based on cooperation, But to argue that latter restricts liberty as much as the former simply confuse cooperation with coercion, it also indicates a distinctly liberal conception of liberty. Seeing its restriction by association with other, where they see association as expression of liberty. Therefore, organization is, according to Malatesta, only the practice of cooperation and solidarity, and is a natural and necessary condition of social life. Clearly, the question is not whether we organize, how do we do so. This means that for anarchists, Engels confused vastly different concepts. Coordination is dutiful confused with command, organization with hierarchy, agreement with domination, indeed, imperious domination. Socialism will only exist when the discipline currently enforced by the stick in the hand of the boss is replaced by the conscience of self-discipline of free individual. It is not changing who holds the stick from a capitalist to a so-called socialist boss that socialism will be created. It is only by breaking up, uprooting the slavish spirit of discipline and replacement of self-management that working people will create a new discipline that will be a basis of anarchist communism. The voluntary self-discipline Bakunin talked about. Clearly, then, Engels did not refute anarchism by his essay, where he refuted a straw man of his own creation. The question was never one whether they could take need for cooperation according to joint activity and agreement. It was in fact questioning how this achievement as such. Engels' diatribe misses the point. Instead of addressing the actual politics of anarchists and their actual use of the word authority, he rather addressed a series of logical deductions he drawn from a false assumption regarding those politics. Engels' essay showed, to paraphrase Keynes' cutting remarks against von Hayek, the bad lamb that can be created when remorseless logical deducts away from incorrect study assumptions. For collective activity, gets organized the need to make it stick by agreement. Collective activity, of course, need to collective decision making and organization. Is so far as Engels had pointed out to his diatribe, namely the group effort made to cooperate with others, but Kuhner, like any anarchist, would have agreed. The question of how are decisions to be made, not whether they should be or not. Ultimately, Engels confused agreement with hierarchy. Anarchists do not. Does organization imply the end of liberty? Engels' argument of authority can be summed up as many forms of collective activities means cooperation with others, and this means the individual subordination themselves to others, especially the group. And such authority cannot be abolished, as organization means the will of a single individual will always be subordinate itself, which means the question settled in an authoritarian way. Engels' argument proved too much, as every form of joint activity involves agreement and subordination, then life itself becomes authoritarian. The only free person, according to Engels' logic, would be the hermit. Anarchists reject such nonsense. If we look at Engels' argument seriously, we will have to conclude that living makes freedom impossible. After all, by doing any joint activities, you subordinate yourself to the other, and so ironically, it's such that your liberty by making decisions and associate with others will be a denial of liberty. Engels' clear argument is lacking something. Perhaps the paradox could be explained once we recognize that Engels is using distinctly liberal view of freedom, i.e., the freedom from anarchists reject this. We see freedom as holistic, freedom from and freedom to. This means that the freedom is maintained by the kind of relationship we form with others, not by isolation. As Bakunin argued, man in isolation can have no awareness of his liberty. Being free for man means being acknowledged, considered, treated as such by another man. Liberty is therefore a feature, not isolation, but an interaction, not of exclusion, but rather of connection. Liberty is denied when we form hierarchical relationship with others, not necessarily when we associate with others. To combine with the individual as a special individual liberty, not its denial, we are aware that freedom is impossible outside of association. With the association, absolute autonomy cannot exist, but such a concept of autonomy will restrict freedom to such a degree that will be self-defeating as to make a mockery of the concept of autonomy, and no safe person will seek it. To quote Malatesta, freedom we want is not absolute metaphysical abstract freedom, but a real freedom, possible freedom, which is considered a community of interest, voluntary solidarity. To state the obvious, anarchists are well aware that anyone who associates and cooperates with others for a common purpose must feel the need to coordinate his or her action with those of his or her fellow members, and do nothing that harms work of others. Thus, the common cause and respect the agreement they have made, except wishing sincerely to leave the association with emerging different of opinion and charge circumstances of conflict over preferred methods make cooperation possible or inappropriate. For anarchists, collective organization cooperation does not mean the individuality. So, unlike the individual classical liberal position of Engels, anarchists recognize that freedom is a product of how we associate. This need for implied continual agreement nor our unrealistic assumption that conflict and uncooperative behavior would disappear. For those with their organization who refuse to cooperate, anarchists argue that this problem is easily solved. Freedom of association implies the freedom not to associate. Those who ignore the decision reach collective and disrupt the organization's working will imply the compelled to leave the association. In this way, a free association could protect itself without the authoritarian organization we have nowadays. Clearly, Engels' critique hides more than is explained. Yes, cooperation and coercion both involve people working jointly together, but they are not to be equated. While Bakunin recognized this fundamental difference and tried perhaps incompletely to differentiate by arguing against the principle of authority, and to be basis politics on the difference, Engels obscured the difference and muddles the water by confusing the two radically different concepts with the word authority. Any organization or group that is based on cooperation or coordination, Engels' principle of authority, how the cooperation is achieved is dependent on the type of organization in question, and that in turn specific the social relation with it. This is a social relationship which determines whether an organization is authoritarian or libertarian, not the universal need to make it stick by agreements. Ultimately, Engels is simply confused obedience with agreement, coercion with cooperation, organization with authority, objective reality with despotism. Rather than seeing organization as restricted freedom, anarchists argue the kind of organization we create was matters. We can form relationships with others which are based on equality, not subordination. As a example, we join the difference between marriage and free love. Once it is recognized the decisions made on the basis of cooperation between equals, Engels says it can be seen for what it is, a deeply flawed piece of cheap and inaccurate diatribe.